Good morning and welcome to the New Jersey Chamber of Commerce Reporters Forum. I'm Kevin Friedlander, Senior Vice President for Communications and Events at the New Jersey Chamber. Thank you for joining us for what promises to be a timely and insightful discussion on the key political and business issues shaping our state. And there's a lot to talk about with all that's going on in the world and in New Jersey with the new administration, the fast approaching World Cup, and the ongoing economic uncertainty. We've assembled this morning an all-star panel of the state's top reporters. Before we begin, I'd like to extend our sincere thanks to our sponsors, Delta Dental, KPMG, and Ocean First Bank, for their continued support in making programs like this possible. These companies are outstanding corporate citizens in the state of New Jersey. As I mentioned, we're fortunate to be joined today by an outstanding group of journalists who bring deep knowledge and perspective on New Jersey's business and political landscape. Our panelists include Joanna Gagas of NJ Spotlight News, NJ Biz's Matt Fazlpour, Brent Johnson with NJ.com, and John Reitmeyer, also from NJ Spotlight News. Moderating today's discussion is Tom Bergeron, owner and editor of Binge, who is well known for his in-depth coverage of New Jersey's business community. At this time, I'll turn the program over to Tom to lead the conversation. Tom, the floor is yours.
Hey, Kevin, thank you for that, and pleasure to be here. This is a very special Chamber of Commerce Reporters Forum. This is remote. I am at the Red Bull's new facility in Morris Township, getting ready for the opening of that. And I'm going to shift my TV over there. Matt Fazlpour is joining me in the room. So this is remote. And I think it's only telling that we start the program with sports. There's the Red Bulls opening up the new facility. There's the NFL draft, which is going to come tomorrow. And the Jets and Giants have 4 picks in the first 16, which is what happens when you're really not very good. We have this little thing called the World Cup coming up. But I'm going to start where everybody's going. 12 straight losses for one of our teams. And maybe you guys don't realize one of our panelists here has named their son after a Met great. I don't know if it's Shamsky or Kranepool or Agbabiani or Lindor.
Our son is Carter and our dog is Hodges. My wife wouldn't let us name Everly Shea.
So, Brent, I think the problem with the Mets is they don't spend any money, right? That's the problem. There's no payroll.
No, it's almost as if, somewhere along the line, God said, you need some sort of comic relief in the world, and I'll create the New York Mets. And he had Casey Stengel for a while to provide that comic relief. Then he's like, I'll just have the team do it. And after we don't need Casey's jokes, we'll just continue to be bad.
So this is the classic reporter segue. I'm going to go to money in sports, and I'm going to stay with Brent and this week's big story. I'm going to call it the false outrage of the week, but we'll see if people disagree. Is the $150 NJ Transit ticket, which the governor has come out against, a number of politicians have come out against, somehow claiming that Mike from Moonachie and his family are going to be hurt by this. Brent, did she score any points going after FIFA? Do you feel like this is a legitimate outrage, or do you think this is false outrage?
It's funny. I see 2 very distinct reactions to this, and it really depends on what camp you're coming from. If you're a soccer fan and you're on social media and going to the World Cup, you're not going to be happy about this, so she doesn't score points with those people. But, inside the state, I'm hearing a lot of positive things among lawmakers, and not every lawmaker, not every insider that I talk to, but that she's, doing what she said she'd do. She ran on affordability and she's standing up for the state. I talked to John Corzine the other day, and that's what he voluntarily talked to me about FIFA. And he said, I think she's doing a good job with that. So really, and I had someone tell me that, people coming to the games or the matches from Luxembourg are not going to vote for her. So she's standing up for the right people. So, again, this is one thing that's definitely reached outside of Trenton. She was on the front page of ESPN.com for calling out FIFA. So I guess it depends on who you talk to, but politically, for who she's trying to appeal to right now, she's talking to the right audience, is what I hear.
What a lucky break for the governor to have some appeal outside of the state. That's sort of shocking. Joanna, when you do sort of your man on the street stuff, when you're talking to everyday people as well as elected officials when this comes up. Is there outrage about this? And we can go into the canceling the Fan Fest in Jersey City, which I think was the right financial decision. How is she doing from what people you talk to on the World Cup?
There's definitely fan outrage about this. Fans are upset, especially local fans, I'd say, folks from this area who are trying to get to the games who feel they've already been price gouged on the tickets, now feel that they know what the typical round trip NJ Transit train is going to be $12.90. This is, even if you compare other states, right? Boston has a pricing model that's similar to this, but they went from $20 to 80. We're going from about 13 to 150. So people are mad. However, when I spoke to Chris Calori and he held a big press conference last week, he said, look, this is cost. We agreed, New Jersey agreed that we would do this at cost. This is what it costs to transport 40,000 people. We're not going to increase because they're already dealing with a structural deficit at NJ Transit. He said, we're not increasing our structural deficit to take this on. So I think there's outrage right now. I think people will settle in and I think they're going to get used to it. And I don't think this is changing. I don't think it's going anywhere. And it doesn't look like FIFA and the administration they're pretty locked in this battle right now. FIFA came out again and said, look, this is outrageous. It's going to have a chilling effect. They say it's going to drive people to the roads and maybe more ride share and maybe more traffic and congestion. So that could be another outcome of this. And then that's going to impact the folks who are living in that region for sure. So yeah, well, we've got to see how it all plays out for the fans and whether or not they end up buying these tickets.
So it's a 39-day event, but Matt, I'm going to go to you and talk about the future for New Jersey for sports and entertainment. There's an idea for a convention center. There's a desire to get another Super Bowl. There's a Final Four. There's WrestleMania. All of these things. Is there a chilling effect when the state says we want you to pay for more? I don't know that Roger Goodell is going to say, yeah, we'll come here and pay for everybody parking. We'll just drive everybody there. How does that impact the state going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And there's been a mixed kind of reaction to all this, to some of the panelists' point that the diehard soccer fans are outraged, but I talk to a lot of people who don't really care about soccer, don't really aren't really tuned into the World Cup, and they are they kind of thought Sherrill did a nice job with going at FIFA, but that was the immediate thing I was thinking of, and as I was sitting in that press conference with Chris Calori that Joanna mentioned, that in this moment when the state is trying to attract more big events, big business, whether it be a Final Four, WrestleMania, another Super Bowl, what does this portend down the line? That is New Jersey. New Jersey already has a reputation of maybe not always being the easiest place to get things done. So now does this create that? So I think that is a valid concern, but I also, the governor and Chris Calori, have laid it out kind of explicitly that they're not going to put this on New Jerseyans. So, it's kind of a mixed bag at the moment, but I think that is certainly something to watch for. And you mentioned the convention center. I mean, they're trying to get more big events in this state. So, if this doesn't play out as well, and again, there's going to be 8 different instances of how, again, 8 unique games. So it'll be interesting to watch, how the efficiency of the operation and obviously, whether businesses will want to come back here again for a big event.
So this is going to be the king of all segues, Reporters Roundtable. I'm going to go to John because we're going to talk about the governor and we're going to talk about money. And he's going to tell us, well, it's great because the state has tons of money. We don't know what to do with it. We should do all this. It's budget season. Thank God John is here because he understands the budget better than anyone. Give us a quick overview of what's going on here. I know they're working feverishly today so they don't come up to the deadline. Sarcasm alert. Where do we stand? How's the budget looking? Give us an early look at this.
It's funny, but it is a good segue because I was talking to somebody the other day who said that despite what appears to be some disagreements right now between the legislature and the governor in terms of individual spending items, that the big sort of Damocles hanging over their head is that they wouldn't want to shut down coming around the World Cup. That would, all this talk about NJ Transit, a government shutdown right around then over a disagreement between Democrats. I was always looking at it ahead of the midterms. That's not the best look for Democrats in making this argument to get more seats in Congress. The person I talked to was looking more at just putting your best foot forward during World Cup. Yeah, I mean, to tee up the budget conversation, we're in the middle of departmental hearings right now. So I think, Department of Health is in the Assembly Budget Committee today. Yesterday um, we had the Agriculture and DEP and Military and Veterans Affairs. Last week we had Labor. So we're just going through the individual requests. So we're getting to look at some of the more granular detail. But, big picture is, the governor has a $60.7 billion budget proposal. She made a lot of headlines because she trimmed out a lot of the spending that the legislature added last year in late June, as the legislature has this habit of doing. And so that's obviously drawing a lot of attention. But, big picture, full funding for the pension system, the K through 12 school aid laws would be funded with more than $12 billion, more than $4 billion for property tax relief. I mean, we could rattle off some of the other big picture items, but not a real surprising budget. She had sort of shed light, headed in with a press conference where she was talking about trying to narrow this structural imbalance they've been running the last few years. So the state spends more annually than it takes in revenues annually. If you run a business or operate a household, that's not a formula for success, yet the state's been doing it for the last few years because there's been a big budget surplus on the sidelines, more than $10 billion. That's now whittling down. And under the current projection, we'd be down under $6 billion by the time we get out of the current fiscal year. So the governor does spend down a little bit of surplus again as part of her budget, what she's proposed. So we'll see where we get to in end of June when we're getting ready for World Cup and getting ready for a new budget.
Brent, I'm going to turn to you. You're a veteran down in Trenton, a grizzled veteran, we'll call you soon. This isn't your first governor. It's not your first budget. The early return there's a feeling out period, right? You've got a new person in the executive branch. They've got new staffing. It's the same legislature. What's the relationship and how is that working? And where do you see good and bad and ugly that's going on right now?
Well, it's a little odd because Democrats are still in control all over the board, and we have it for the first time in many years, a Democrat taking over for a Democrat, decades. But she's a different kind of Democrat in the sense that she's coming from DC. She wasn't based in the state per se. She doesn't know any of these guys, and that there's definitely still a feeling out period. I know some lawmakers are still trying to make sense of what she wants. They were a little taken aback that she appeared to take some swings at them in her budget speech, saying that they spend too much and they do things too loosely and, right up against the deadline. She said she wants to change the status quo. And also after last year's election, where a lot of Democrats were kind of unsure about her, whether she would be aggressive enough. And she's shown early on that she wants to follow through on being more aggressive and more status quo challenging. So yeah, there's definitely a feeling out. And I don't get the sense that there's going to be a huge fight, but I also don't get the sense that they're ruling that out. If from the people I talk to, that no one wants a shutdown. It's the World Cup, midterms, but you have to remember the time we probably came the closest to a shutdown in the Murphy years was his first year. We came they were arguing over the millionaire's tax, and Sweeney and Murphy weren't getting along. So I haven't seen that yet, but I mean, Sherrill's gone after Stan J and said she wants to pare that down, which is Craig Coughlin's biggest legislative priority. And I don't think they're going to come to blows over that, but I do get the sense that a lot of lawmakers were chafed by what she said during her speech, and that they're going to have an eagle eye out to see if she adds any spending to the budget and so on and so forth. So I'm saying not choppy waters, but everyone's kind of got their looking glass where they're waiting for if there might be an attack.
Joanna, I'm going to turn to you. Are there any topics that you're seeing from the folks that you talk to in the legislature and around the state that, somebody mentioned the school funding formula, which is clearly a disaster. Where do you see priorities for this budget coming in, other than just we're going to be transparent and we're going to be accountable and we're going to cut? What are you hearing?
Depends which party you're talking to. I can tell you on the Democratic side, school funding formula is a priority, I think, on both sides. I'll say we've heard a lot of districts down in Ocean County year over year saying that they've been on the losing side. And then there have been, some districts in a couple Democratic regions where there's been emergency spending and they've had provisions to fund some gaps. There's no real, I did see that question pop up. There's no real clear plan as of yet as to how that funding formula gets revised. It's complicated and yet it's not. I'm not going to get into the details of that right now, but I do hear from the the Senate Education Committee Chair Vin Gopal that this is something that they've been talking about, they've been working on, just no real plan outlined. I did speak with Assembly Speaker Craig Coughlin, and I asked him about the Stay NJ cuts. He defends that program to the hilt, as John Reitmeyer can and probably will tell you. The law requires that gets cut back if we don't have the funds to keep it going. But I did ask him about these kind of Christmas tree items in the back. I said, these tend to be backroom deals. He said, that's nonsense. It's absolutely not true. These are how the state, proves its priorities. And so I don't think that he shares the governor's vision there for eliminating that type of spending at the end. He made that pretty clear in our interview. So there's also, I think, a real commitment to funding the status quo, right? No one wants to see cuts, especially in their district. These programs, whether it be cancer programs or funding the arts, no one wants to see things that have been funded by the state cut. So I think there's going to be a convergence of reality versus wish lists. And I don't know how that plays out, but choppy waters, to Brent's point.
So, John, you've seen the budget and you understand the budget like nobody else. Again, I think Joanna's point is well made. The wish list, but what are you going to chop? You always point out every year they say A, but then they do B. Is there any areas here where you can see that there's an opening to do things, or does she have to slice everything equally to get to where she wants to be, and that alone causes problems?
Yeah, I mean, I think this the central problem, and it's always been this way, is the spending ambition is high, is broader than the courage to tax at the level needed to match how much they want to spend. So there's always this run from gimmick to gimmick to gimmick, tax amnesty or some other thing where they can find a couple $100 million, do some asset sales. For years, the state didn't make its full pension contribution. We're seeing the damage caused by that. I still think it's remarkable that of the more than 7 billion budgeted for the pension on an annual basis now, which counts money from the lottery, 6 out of that 7 billion is filling in the unfunded liability created all the years when the state either shorted pension contributions or made no contribution at all, which is kind of crazy to think about. That you walk in on your first day and somebody says to you, you have to spend $6 billion on this thing that you had nothing to do with. So the state doesn't do that anymore. It now funds its pension obligation. It now funds its school aid law, although there are debates about whether the school aid law itself needs to be changed. There was an effort in recent years to pay down debt, which has cut costs on the debt service side, but you have these dramatic increases in other areas like employee and retiree health benefits, up more than 80% over the last decade if you look closely at the budget numbers. When you count the pension contribution and the required spending on employee and retiree health benefits, you're talking about 15 billion on a $60 billion budget. So a huge percentage. Again, you put in that formula aid to directly goes to classrooms, you're talking about almost half the budget is just in those 3 areas. So that's where it's like 2 things can be true at the same time. All of this individual spending that lawmakers defend, and we should be clear that there's different categories when their ads come in. There's spending that I think a lot of people would agree on, but then there's things like funding for tiki bars and other things that I think us in the press have a lot of fun with at times. And there's also this idea of when that spending comes into the budget, and all due respect to the Assembly Speaker and his conversation with Joanna, is how much transparency there is at the end when we would look for a factual basis for adding this spending, and whether that policy debate about more money for something like NJ Transit, right? We talked about NJ Transit. It's definitely not printing money these days. It needs all the money it can get. this is kind of a teaching moment about mass transit in the state right now when we look at the World Cup issue, because this is how much it costs to have a functioning mass transit system, right? It does not fund itself. It needs to be subsidized. And yet I think there's a strong argument about what it does for the state economy. I talk to people who don't want to fund NJ Transit at all because there's not much transit. I grew up in South Jersey. You'll hear this from the business group in South Jersey. There's just not much mass transit in parts of South Jersey, whether it's train or bus. I hear a lot of arguments about why do we even spend money on NJ Transit, and yet, now we see it being relied on so heavily to move people to and from soccer games. So, this is the give and take. We'll have to see. Brent had a really good observation. Like, we're still learning Sherrill. We're still learning how her staff is going to go. That first year with Murphy, and I'll try to say this politely, that blinking contest that came going up to the deadline where we kind of almost had a shutdown when you think about it, because
Very close, yeah.
yeah, midnight's the deadline, but they can push that a little bit. We were there late when they were arguing over the millionaire's tax, and we got this little I think I was calling it the pentamillionaire's tax because it was only on 5 million and over. We're still learning. Like, we're going to have to see who blinks as we get closer to June. And Joanna mentioned the Stay NJ property tax relief program. During a year when you're seeing cuts to things like cancer research, then you put that in the context of a property tax payment as much as $6,500 going to somebody who can make $499,999 annually. That's sort of the give and take, and we're still in April, so we're going to let this relationship play out. She does seem to be a no nonsense governor at this point. So I think every budget's different, every year's different. This one I think is really interesting.
You had me at Tiki for Transit gubernatorial campaign. I think that's going to be a calling card moving forward. Whoever wants to jump on that. John, real quick to go back to you, because I don't think people understand this. You're correct on the 6 billion, whatever we're adding to the pension plan. But this isn't a one-time payment, and this isn't a 3-year payment. This is 20 years of damage. It's going to take 20 years to make up for it, right?
It's a really good point, and it's another thing I think that gets overlooked. The damage, it's an advertisement for paying your bills, right? The damage that was done to the pension fund during all these years of inadequate funding will take decades just to get to what's considered 80% funded, which is like good for public pensions, but the goal is to get up to 100% funding. That's going to take like 2 to 3 decades of elevated payments at the rate that they're spending now. Now, at some point, those payments become a smaller share. We assume that there's going to be gradual spending growth in the budget, and maybe revenues will grow along with it naturally instead of, through tax increases. So eventually that 7 billion will look a little bit smaller as a percentage of total spending. But yeah, we're at this elevated rate for decades to just tread water on pension funding. It's a really good point.
If I wanted that, I would just take out a couple of student loans. Matt, let me turn to you and talk about the idea of Sherrill, the first 100 days, reputation. The polling has been outstanding on her. Everyone, just as she did in the election, huge fans. She's come out and made a lot of strong statements. Is she boxing herself in a corner? Because, as everyone has said, reality is going to hit. She's going to need to address, hey, she's not the first governor to say, I'm getting rid of Christmas tree spending. I'm going to make everything, I'm going to be transparent. The rubber's going to meet the road here in a second. Talk a little bit about her first 100 days and how she's perceived so well. And there's sort of, we'll see what happens coming up.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And I just wanted to make one point. All great points on the budget. The other thing I'm kind of watching for is just, again, the timing, right? We all write the stories every year that came down to the last minute, right? The final top line and some of the parts of the budget are getting brought to the committee members at 11 p.m., right? Just frantically passing it to make sure it could be signed in time. So, she's really worked hard to kind of, show that she gets things done, right? That's kind of what she's all about, right? Is showing I want to get things done. So to me, the number one way you could do that, and I know every governor says this, is by not having this budget process come down to the absolute finish line. I think that in itself just optically, would show, okay, that maybe it is a new day in Trenton, but I won't hold my breath on that part. In terms of the polling, right there, no doubt early kind of honeymoon period, right? The strong polling thus far. Tom, we're always at all the business events around the state. I think she's gotten good marks there, right? She's done kind of the whole circuit. I know the executive orders on streamlining permitting is a huge thing. That's been a huge priority for the administration so far. So that kind of thing has certainly gotten high marks. I know Dale Caldwell has really gotten high marks, particularly with small business. Tommy, I know you've written about this before too. You see him at events, he's staying 2 hours afterwards, talking to every person that comes in there. So I know those kinds of things are certainly going a long way. There's the few items in the budget which irk the business community a bit, especially the Medicaid provision for with 50 or more employees. So I think it's a mixed bag. And again, but the main thing is that now, okay, you have these high marks early on. Now you have to start making major decisions, starting with the first budget, again, starting with World Cup stuff. So I think the rubber is certainly meeting the road here. But I think certainly some marks. Again, I think the permitting thing, that's one thing I hear about all the time as I kind of make my way around the state. That part, and for any small business owner particularly, right, just to navigate the web of bureaucracy in this state and then locally. I think stuff like that will go a long way. In terms even beyond just one big ticket item. I think the process stuff has seemed to be an early focus. I just talked to Evan Weiss recently, and that's another thing. They're all seem to be going around the state doing the listening tour, but that's something that stood out. Another thing he had said to me is, even beyond the startup businesses and the big businesses, there's a big focus on trying to help the smallish to medium-sized business kind of take that next step. So that's another thing I'm watching for as well.
Can I jump in? Just when it comes to process, I just want to follow up on Matt's point, because the governor gets blamed when this comes down to the end, right? But the legislature carries so much of the weight in terms of how this plays out. And I find it interesting that there are, on both sides, there's a Republican bill and a Democratic-led bill. One introduced by Assemblywoman Dunn and Assemblyman Scharfenberger that creates this filing deadline. You can't file any add-ons to the budget after June 1st. And then we saw Assemblywoman Brennan and Assemblyman Bala introduce a bill where the budget would have to sit for 14 days so that legislators actually have time to review it. I don't see that there's the political will from the Assembly Speaker to push those bills forward at this point. So you might have some newcomers, or you might have some kind of gung-ho legislators who say they want to change the process, but until the leadership takes that on, not sure much will change. And so, but I think the governor will in the end take the blame sometimes for that bad behavior.
That's a great point, especially for a first timer. And Joanna, I'm going to stay with you because you made a great comment earlier about people in Luxembourg do not vote in the election, right? I get all that. And for members of the business community, they'll say, look, the business community is 1% of 1% of 1% of the voters. So when push comes to shove, things get dumped on the business community that, who isn't pro, all these people are supposedly millionaires and billionaires. So I'm going to ask you a simple question. Do you think Governor Sherrill is pro-business?
Oh, the simplest question that there is. Well, I think it was Brent who said the Luxembourg comment, but I won't take credit for that. However, she says she is. I asked her about it shortly after she presented her budget. I said, look, some in the business community are saying you're trying to balance the budget on the backs of business. She changed the alternative business tax calculation. And I spoke with Assemblyman Michael Nganamort, who said in a hearing where he was speaking with the treasurer, you're trying to tax business on their gross income rather than their net. And some of these businesses, even if they're big business, are operating on very thin margins. And so you're creating an environment where sometimes they can't pay the tax. Other times they're just not going to come to New Jersey, or they're going to leave New Jersey. When I asked the governor, not specifically about that gross versus net point, but I did ask her more broadly, she said, look, we are trying to do everything we can to support and help grow, especially small to medium-sized businesses. She talks about the permitting process and this dashboard that she created to help them, better understand regulation in the state and know where they are in the permitting process. But there's no doubt that she has been very specific in saying she's not raising individual taxes. She's not made the same distinction for business. Is she pro-business? I think many businesses in the state would say no, not exactly. No one in the Democratic Party has been especially pro-business for what they want to see. They want no taxes. They want a corporate business tax that is similar to Pennsylvania. I think we're like six points off. John, help me there. I think it's like 11% versus 6%, or 5% in Pennsylvania. So it's the argument. Do they come and do they pay their fair share, or do you make it really friendly for business so that they come and they stay and they create, they become economic drivers in the region? Depends who you talk to.
I'm going to talk to Brent next. I'm asking him the same question. Is the governor pro-business?
I wrote about this a few weeks ago that we were on a chamber event. So she's gotten some praise from some of the business group leaders, like Mr. Bracken and Ms. Sakirka. And it seems to be that they really like her willingness to want to cut red tape and tone down bureaucracy, which I know is a big deal in addition to taxes. But yeah, those taxes are the big question mark. Is this a honeymoon for them, and that this is going to change the more she tries to tap the business community to balance the budget? So she definitely, though, is, and I heard that everyone is more happy working with her than they were with the Murphy administration. That was more difficult to work with the Murphy team when it came to business. But it depends, because I also heard that Murphy was great with corporate. Netflix really loved him and working with those film companies. So it's, again, as with anything with Sherrill, it's still early and everyone's still trying to feel it out. But that's an interesting balance she's trying to do. She goes after Donald Trump and trying to appeal to those who are anti-Trump on the left wing of the Democratic Party, but also tries to be a little bit more conservative with businesses. It's all about a moderate balance with Sherrill, and you could argue that's one of her appeals on the national stage, is that as the Democratic Party tries to argue how to move forward, she's saying my victory last year was an example of how you can do it, and part of that is being moderate.
So, John, I'll go to you. The phrase always is, can you tax your way to growth? And I think the better phrase is, can you tax the business community to growth? I mean, we've tried a lot of different business taxes and gimmicky business taxes over the year. Is that something you see potentially again coming up? Another surprise by the ending? Does this make sense? Has the state had a good history of when it's pushed harder on the business community? Has that raised revenues, or just provided a one-time chunk that's just annoyed the business community, for lack of a better word?
Can I answer all of the above? No, all joking aside, like, this is a tough time to ask that question, right? Because the corporation business tax right now is not performing too well for a lot of different reasons. But the revenues coming in just from business tax is broad-based, and picking up where Joanna left it, we get these comparisons sometimes against states, and they're not always apples to apples because of the way the marginal rates work. But I think she's trying to have it both ways, and I don't mean that as a pejorative right now, where she's trying to do things that respond to business concerns, because the idea that the state comes back to spending more than it takes in annually. Well, one way out of that would be through revenue growth. But do you do that revenue growth in ways that could potentially soften revenues going forward? You get a quick hit and then a decline, or do you try to grow it organically? Murphy always used to say, when we would challenge him on his spending ambitions, well, we've got to grow the economy. And he put in efforts to create new economies in New Jersey, whether we look at recreational cannabis, sports betting. I mean, there was efforts to sort of, reviving the film tax credits to sort of astroturf some of this stuff. And then some of this is just, broad-based, and this is where the policy debates always come in. So, looking back at the final years of Murphy, we had what I will call the corporate transit tax, because of the way that functions. That hit a segment of the business community. Last year, we had $600 million in tax increases, some of them hitting businesses as well. And this year, we've got another $750 million in, we can say, maybe lowercase tax increases, because when you're changing tax policy in a way that increases somebody's liability, you're raising their taxes. But I think there's this effort to do it in a more surgical manner than broad-based, and that's always going to be sort of the balancing act. Is you're trying not to hit everybody, so you get everybody mad at you. You're trying to be selective in how it hits, and you're trying to portray it as a matter of fairness. Matt brought up the proposed change in policy related to a health assessment for companies that have a certain amount of employees receiving Medicaid benefits. I think that's an area that deserves a lot of scrutiny, because there's a good policy debate about why some of their employees are in that category. And these are the types of things where when you're trying to balance a budget, you see numbers and you don't always see people. When you sit through these budget hearings and you see all the people who come out and say, that cut does this to my program, it gets a little more complicated because it puts a face on it. Even the person who came out to testify in favor of keeping the stay NJ income ceiling where it is today had a compelling argument. The state made a promise. It just made this promise. I made decisions about my life based on this promise. And now the state is going back on that promise. And I think you would hear businesses say this about the surcharge that was on the CBT that became the transit, and I will say tax. So I think like it's a complicated answer because some of it is predictability, right? When the state says it's doing something, does it do it for more than just a year? And then some of it is, who are you hitting? Are you hitting a broad base, or are you hitting just a selective few? And then it's, what is your strategy, right? Is this part of some bigger strategy that you're doing because you're trying to generate economic growth? Permitting is a great example. You could not go to any event and hear people complain about permitting or the regulatory process more. That's kind of a no-brainer in the sense that it doesn't cost that much money. The DEP is going to spend $4 million more to add staff in the permitting operations. You could potentially get a lot of bang for your buck out of that, but that doesn't balance the budget, right? So it's complicated, and that's where I was joking all of the above, because I think she wants to be seen as pro-business, and Brent mentioned her kind of moderate leanings. I think she wants to really. I don't think it's fake. I think she wants to be balanced. But the changes that are going to raise revenue on the business tax side aren't going to do her any favors in terms of that reputation. The reputational thing that Joanna was talking about, that when somebody's making an assessment of where do I start out, is New Jersey that place?
Let's just point out that all of the above is only as good an answer as kinda, which I think is also equally effective. Matt, I'm going to go to you because you mentioned Dale Caldwell and his impact in the business community, but I think it's broader than that. It's a new administration. You're at a lot of events with the business communities. Tom Bracken has been very clear on, look, we just want to be part of the conversation. We want to meet regularly. We want to explain what the situation is. The business community knows it's going to be good, bad, and ugly in all things, but they just want to be part of the conversation. From what you've seen in these first 100 days, is the business community feeling like they have a voice with this administration?
I think so far, yes, because if you remember the tail end of the campaign, I don't know if the business community was necessarily feeling that way with now Governor Sherrill. So I think from the transition, right, some of the appointments she made there was an early olive branch, and then right, she came out some of these early executive orders, and now, I mean, again, her and the lieutenant governor have certainly been making the rounds, right, whether it be at the Renew Summit, right. I've seen Governor Sherrill speak at BioNJ, Hinge, NJBIA. So she's been out there, and then that's why I've kind of looked at it that way. You've had Governor Sherrill at some of these, big industry events. Then you've had Dale Caldwell on the ground at a lot of, smaller venues, smaller businesses, things like that. So yeah, I mean, that was a big theme down there in Atlantic City, was feeling like, okay, not only getting stuff done, to your point, Tom, like, and actionable items, but just feeling like you have a seat at the table. So far, I that's the sense I get. Again, that doesn't mean it's all kumbaya and that everybody's happy about everything that's been rolled out thus far. But at least at this point, and it all goes back to kind of that honeymoon period, I get that sense. But now, as you start to unwind a first budget, and then other, pieces of legislation down the line, and how you make all those things work and fit into the jigsaw puzzle, that could certainly change at any moment. But as we sit here right now, I think that it's fair to say that the business leaders in the state, at least, again, in mid and small size business, will have a whole different perspective. But I think the business leaders in the state would tell you that they at least feel like that they're being heard and that they have somewhat of a seat at the table. And what that will mean down the line remains to be seen.
So one of the complaints during the campaign from the reporters covering her, and I know it's a shock that reporters might actually have a complaint, is that the governor may not have been as specific about what she wanted to do as she could have, right? And that's a fair way you go through an election, your goal is to get elected, and she did by 2 touchdowns. The one specific that she did give at every campaign stop, and she's reiterated it at every stop since she's been governor, was an effort to solve the energy issue. I was down in Salem, beautiful Salem, New Jersey, for a nuclear announcement. That's not going to change things overnight. She's touted a number of executive orders. Joanna, let's start with you on the subject of energy, on the subject of data centers, on the subject of small modular reactors, on the subject of freezing rates, on all of the above, right? Is she having an impact on energy, and is it fair to say that she can?
This is an issue where you're not going to see change overnight, but I think when you make a promise as loudly and as boldly as she did, voters are going to be less forgiving when you don't solve the problem quickly. And I don't see the prices coming down. We're just about to get into the warm weather months. We already had that 1 week of 90-degree weather. So, who knows I haven't looked at the broader forecast, but you can imagine that we're going to start hearing people say, hey, what happened to that promise when we start paying for those higher electricity bills? Now, the BPU says that they are bringing more solar energy and battery energy online. I spoke with the head of the BPU recently, and they're touting some of those kind of early actions where more energy is coming online. But this is a big problem to fix, and it's a complicated problem. And some of it comes down to, let's look at Vineland, where there's a data center coming in. They are supposed to be bringing in their own energy. I think 85% of their own energy they're supposed to be supplying. But if you follow some of the local news, there are these town hall meetings across municipalities around the state where some of these boroughs are kind of greenlighting data centers without the public input, without the community knowing. And so what regulations are going to be in place as you kind of go municipality by municipality, whether they're going to have to provide their own data. And here's something that's also complicated that most people don't understand. No one knows how many data centers are coming online, or projected to come online. And so as PJM, which is the regional grid operator, as they set their market rates, they do that with this guesstimation of how many data centers may be coming in, and that's how they set the demand portion of it. And so we're paying for this projection that's not clear, that no one has a real handle on, not even the BPU. And that's what Christine Gould-Sadovi, the president of the BPU, told me. Like, they're still trying to get a handle on it. So no, I don't think that we have solved the energy problem. I don't think that beyond this rate freeze, we're going to see any type of real relief quickly. But I do see more efforts to bring on smaller projects like solar, like battery storage, that could start to chip away. But it's going to take time. I don't know if voters are going to give her that time.
Brent, this is a real political football, and it should be pointed out that even if we move a data center to Pennsylvania, which will accept them with open arms, it still impacts our rates. We're still part of PGM, which was Pennsylvania, Jersey, and Maryland, which that's something I learned like 3 days ago.
It's actually 13 states.
And now it's 13 states, but that's what it was originally known for.
Yeah.
So any of those areas where it happens comes up. And politically, listen, there's nothing like higher bills in the summer to cause problems. And we got a little bit of a conflict going on in the Middle East right now, which isn't helping things either. Brent, from a political standpoint, is this the biggest thing moving forward that not just the governor, we're talking about all elected officials are going to have to deal with?
I think as we do get into the summer months, yes, it's something that everybody can see. Everyone sees the price on their bills. So whether you care about Mikey Sherrill's political stature or not, it's going to affect you. So this is where you could see poll numbers change and more negative comments. But, because I've heard that there's only so much she can do to address this problem, and that some of it may even be sleight of hand that she's done. And that may not even be her fault. So this is going to come to a bigger head, I think. Just as I heard whispers about this being a big campaign issue last June, it was like we got past the primary, and I kept hearing everyone behind me whispering, what's really going to be the big issue is energy costs. And I wrote a newsletter about it like in July, and when no one else was paying attention, simply because that's what I kept hearing, and that ended up being true, and ended up being the main hook of her campaign was I'm going to lower or I'm going to freeze these bills. So a year later, I'm sure it's still going to be a topic.
So one of the things that the governor has going for her among dozens and dozens is she's extraordinarily likable. She's young, she's vibrant, she's a mother, she's doing a lot of good things. You see her out and about, and she announced that this summer that the family's going to move to Drumthwacket, right? I mean, how's that for a summer home? Does that impact the perception? Is that neat for a day? Do people care? Joanna, I'll start with you. Is that of any value whatsoever?
Don't care. Actually, I think that this comes from the governor not liking the commute from Trenton to Montclair every day. I spoke to her about it, and she said, "Man, it's a lot going back and forth, and certainly she can work in the car." But I get the sense that this might be a practicality issue. She has a 14-year-old. Not sure if that's her youngest daughter. I'm not sure if she's going to private school now. I would imagine. I don't know what that plan is, but that's certainly a change. She had said, "Look, I've got a kid in school. We're staying in Montclair," and she'd said that, I think, about a year ago. So, how much of this is just wanting to get home and be with the family and be able to be there for dinner? I'm not sure, but I don't think the voters care. I truly don't think they do. She is, I think, only the third governor, right, to move into Drumthwacket, and so if you've been there, I mean, it's a beautiful space, but it's old. I know the Murphys put a lot of money into it, and they really did renovate it, and they kind of brought it up to speed in many ways. But my sense is this is just practicality. This is just get me off the road.
It must be nice. And of course, there's that famous beach house that I think Governor Christie used on one famous occasion, too. So the governor has lots of opportunities there to do it. All right. This is great. It's always good to get together. And for anyone who's seen me do these dog and pony shows, we always do a nice lightning round at the end. So we're going to do two quick questions here. One the panel's been assumed about, and the other one they have no idea is coming. So we're going to start with the World Cup, right? I'm going to put you in the Brandy Chastain moment. It's the World Cup final. We go to PKs, as they love to call it. It's the final kick. It's do or die. Brent Johnson, do you want to be kicking or do you want to be the goalie?
Goalie, because it's the more unusual position. You don't have to run as much.
The three-step run-up can really win you.
Yeah, you have a 50-50 shot of leaning one way or the other.
Joanna, am I putting you in net or are you kicking? What are you doing?
Kicking. First of all, I'm not diving for any balls anymore. I mean, once you hit a certain age, that's not happening. I'm kicking.
John, where are you going?
I'm a failed soccer player. I've been both, but I'm also a numbers person, and the odds are with the shooter. So I'm my success rate is higher as a kicker. So I'm definitely kicking.
Maddie, what do you say? What are you doing?
I'm shooting.
All right.
We're all taking shots on Brent.
I'm playing baseball. That's what I mostly.
Well, apparently they can use it these days. All right.
Yeah.
The second question, I mentioned my trip to Salem. And after we did that, as reporters do, the first thing you need to do is find a place where you can file a story. And if it has Wi-Fi that works, that's great. If it has coffee, it's even better. I did a nice LinkedIn post and told the world that I often go to McDonald's for those two reasons to file stories. There's a McDonald's on McCarter Highway in Newark where I believe I filed about 36 stories from good coffee, good parking, and this and that. So our second lightning round question is, where is the weirdest place you have filed a story and or written a story on this glamorous life that we all live as journalists? Let's go reverse order. Matt, we'll start with you.
Yeah, like everybody on here, I've filed in all kinds of random places, right? I have filed during family parties, all kinds of stuff. But I would say the most random, in McDonald's, Starbucks. But I would say the most random spot is like on a golf course. I was playing golf and had to write a story as I was writing it in my notes section as the round went on and filed it from the course. So I think that would be my most random spot, at least recently.
I think like I, I'm from New Jersey. I've worked my whole career here, so my answers are very New Jersey. Um, Filing from Turnpike rest stops is probably, I think I probably filed from all of them, so it might not be random, but to be able to get the trifecta or however many fectas of all the Turnpike rest areas, and sometimes not in them, right? Just parking close enough for that Wi-Fi. And then New Jersey Transit, definitely filing a story from the train, and even Amtrak. So those would be my best ones.
I will say that I was guilty of once at the Hoboken train station of leaning against the glass at the Dunkin' Donuts just so I could steal their Wi-Fi to file a story.
Yeah, there's that sweet spot where you're like just close enough, but you're not too obvious.
You don't have to order, you don't have to use this and that. It's all good. All right, Joanna, where are you going? The weirdest place you filed or written from?
Yeah, I mean, remember too, when I'm filing, I'm usually doing an edit and then sending in a full video. So it's like a beast of a file that I have to send in, and I've got to track and record in silence. So I would say every Panera in the state I've touched, and I have to track sometimes in loud spaces, like put a coat over my head and I'm recording into a microphone. If anyone saw me, it's the least glamorous job. But I would say one of the hairiest spots was editing on the train, go on the walk to Washington, and then literally getting off the train and just dumping all my stuff and sitting in a chair and just praying that that story would and the full package would go all the way up to Newark, which it did, and we got in like just in the nick of time.
The question, of course, we always want to know is when you're at Panera, did you go for the apple or did you go for the chips? What was your side item?
It's always the apple. It's the apple for me.
It's the smallest apple known to man, but it's good.
It's like a clementine-sized apple.
All right, Brent Johnson, weirdest place you have filed or written from?
I have two stories, one of which involves you, Tom. But the first one is Hillary Clinton did a rally during the presidential campaign at Old Trump Plaza, or the skeleton of it. And it was me and every other political reporter on the planet there. And I couldn't get Wi-Fi. So for some reason, I ran into the bathroom on the boardwalk at the Atlantic City boardwalk. And I wrote on the sink. Like I put my laptop on the sink and was writing inside this old Victorian bathroom. And Eris, our photographer, took a photo of me looking sweaty. And I always remember that. Hillary Clinton inspired me to write at the bathroom outside of Trump. And two, one of my first ever major assignments as a young sports reporter for the Star Ledger was I went to Quincy Doobie's draft party, the former Rutgers basketball player. And I went and sat with his family throughout the draft and was there when he got drafted by the Sacramento Kings. And basically everyone was leaving and I had to go, and I sat outside their house in my car and stole their Wi-Fi to file the story about Quincy Doobie getting drafted because Tom Bergeron was my editor and he was like, I need that story now. So I was in my car outside of Quincy Doobie's house. And I think his dad walked out at one point and was like, you okay? I was like, yeah, deadline. So I also would like to note that the second story I ever covered for the Star Ledger Sports Department was a Metro Stars soccer game, a 0-0 tie. And I had no clue what the heck I was writing about. They just ran up and down the field and didn't score. And I was the most quotes I ever used in a game story because I was like, let Bruce Arena describe what's going on.
There you go. All right, I can think of nothing better than to bring in Kevin Friedlander right now to close us up for what has been an enjoyable hour of comedy and insight.
Tom, great job moderating as always. You always make it entertaining. And thank you, Joanna, Matt, John, and Brent for an informative discussion on New Jersey issues. We probably could have gone on for another hour. Thanks to our sponsors, Delta Dental, KPMG, and Ocean First Bank. To all of our attendees, have a great day. That's a wrap.
Thank you.